Shut your mouth and know your place. Judge William Hargrove's hand cracked across Dr. Rachel Bennett's face with brutal force. The courtroom fell dead silent. 47 witnesses held their breath. The bailiff froze mid-step. Dr. Bennett didn't flinch. She refused to cry. She touched her cheek and looked directly at the judge with a calm that made everyone nervous. "You have no idea what you just did," she said quietly. Judge Hargrove smirked, still drunk on his own power. "I know exactly what I did. I put you in your place." But something in her eyes made his confidence waver, something that suggested this woman wasn't who he thought she was, something that hinted at a power he could not see or understand. What Judge Hargrove didn't know about the woman he had just humiliated would destroy his career in moments. What he didn't know would turn his courtroom into a federal crime scene. Have you ever watched someone's prejudice lead them to attack the one person they should have feared most? Dr. Rachel Bennett had walked through the metal detectors of the county courthouse in Franklin County like any other visitor. She wore a simple black blazer, carried a professional leather briefcase, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in places of power. The security guard barely glanced at her federal credentials, just another bureaucrat with paperwork to file. He waved her through with the same bored indifference he showed everyone else. "Federal observer for courtroom 6, Dr. Bennett told the clerk at the information desk. The young woman behind the counter checked her computer screen. "Judge Hargrove's family court session. You can take any open seat in the gallery." What the clerk didn't mention, which she had no reason to know, was that Judge Hargrove had specifically requested no advance notice of federal observers. He preferred to run his courtroom without what he called interference from Washington desk jockeys. Dr. Bennett made her way up 2 flights of stairs past faded motivational posters about justice and equality. The irony was not lost on her. She had been reading complaints about this courthouse. 47 separate families had filed grievances alleging racial bias in Judge Hargrove's courtroom. 47 families claimed they had been treated differently because of the color of their skin. The courthouse staff had dismissed most of these complaints as sore losers and people who did not understand how the legal system worked. But Dr. Bennett understood something they didn't. Patterns do not lie. Statistics do not have prejudices. And when 47 different people tell the same story about the same judge, someone needs to pay attention. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors to courtroom 6 and immediately felt the weight of institutional authority. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, an American flag drooping in the corner like it was tired of witnessing whatever happened in this room. Judge William Hargrove sat behind his massive bench like a king on his throne. 62 years old, gray hair perfectly styled, wearing his black robes like armor. He had been dispensing what he called tough love justice. The local bar association loved him. The prosecutor's office considered him an ally. Crime victims praised his harsh sentences, but Dr. Bennett was not here to evaluate his popularity. She was here to document his behavior. She chose a seat in the middle of the gallery, pulled out her notepad, and began observing. The first case of the day involved a young white man caught driving with a suspended license. Judge Hargrove listened patiently as the defendant explained his circumstances: lost job, sick mother, trying to get to work interviews. "I understand your situation, Mr. Anderson," Hargrove said with genuine sympathy, "but we have laws for a reason. I'm going to give you community service and a payment plan for your fines. Does that work for you?" Anderson nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Your Honor. I really appreciate your understanding." Dr. Bennett wrote down every word, every tone, every gesture. The second case involved Carla Mendoza, a Latina woman seeking a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend. Judge Hargrove's demeanor shifted subtly. His questions became sharper. His patience grew thinner. "Ms. Mendoza, why didn't you call the police when this alleged harassment first started?" "I did, Your Honor, 3 times. They said it wasn't serious enough. I'm not interested in excuses. Either you have evidence or you don't." Dr. Bennett's pen moved faster across her notepad. She had seen this before. The microaggressions that most people missed, the slight change in voice tone, the way respect evaporated when the skin color changed. But these were just warm-up acts. According to her research, Judge Hargrove's real bias emerged when black defendants appeared before his bench. The statistics were staggering. Black defendants in his courtroom received sentences averaging 40% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. They were denied bail at twice the rate. Their probation was revoked more frequently, numbers that stark do not happen by accident. As the morning progressed, Dr. Bennett documented everything. The way Judge Hargrove leaned back in his chair when addressing white defendants, leaned forward aggressively when addressing minorities, the way his voice carried patience for some and impatience for others, the way justice seemed to depend on a sliding scale of skin tone. What Judge Hargrove did not realize was that every word, every gesture, every decision was being evaluated by someone with the power to end his career, someone who understood that bias in the justice system was not just unfair, it was unconstitutional. The next case on the docket would test everything Dr. Bennett had observed, and it would give Judge Hargrove the opportunity to reveal exactly who he really was. The matter involved a child support modification between the Fosters. Brianna Foster walked through the courtroom doors like she was entering a battlefield, which in many ways she was. 28 years old, working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids alone, and fighting for every dollar of support her ex-husband owed. She wore her best outfit, a navy dress she had bought years ago for job interviews, now slightly faded but still professional. Her hands shook slightly as she carried a manila folder stuffed with bank statements, pay stubs, and medical bills. Everything organized, everything documented, everything she hoped would prove she deserved help. Dr. Bennett shifted forward in her seat. This was the moment she had been waiting for. According to her research, Judge Hargrove's bias became most pronounced in child support cases involving black mothers. The pattern was unmistakable and unconscionable. "Ms. Foster," Judge Hargrove's voice carried none of the warmth he had shown the white defendant earlier. "You're requesting an increase in child support payments. On what grounds?" Brianna approached the podium nervously. "Your Honor, my children's expenses have increased significantly. Medical costs, school supplies, rent." "Speak up. This isn't your living room." The first strike. Dr. Bennett wrote it down, noting the tone, the unnecessary humiliation of a woman simply trying to advocate for her children. Brianna cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing that my ex-husband's income has increased significantly since our original agreement. Meanwhile, my youngest son was diagnosed with asthma and needs expensive medication." "Did you bring your ex-husband's tax returns?" "No, Your Honor. He won't provide them to me, and my lawyer said, 'I'm not interested in what your lawyer said. Either you have evidence or you don't.'" Judge Hargrove leaned back in his chair with visible irritation. "How do you expect me to make a decision based on your assumptions about his income?" Dr. Bennett's jaw tightened. She had watched this exact scenario play out in dozens of cases. Black mothers were expected to provide documentation that was legally impossible for them to obtain, while white fathers were given the benefit of the doubt and assistance in gathering evidence. "Your Honor," Brianna's voice wavered slightly, "I brought his LinkedIn profile showing his new position, and I have screenshots of social media posts where he talks about his promotion and salary increase." "Screenshots?" Judge Hargrove's tone dripped with disdain. "You want me to make legal decisions based on Facebook posts? Ms. Foster, this is a court of law, not a gossip session." The gallery stirred uncomfortably. Even without understanding legal procedure, everyone could feel the disrespect radiating from the bench. Dr. Bennett stood quietly and moved to a better observation position near the side wall. She needed to document every facial expression, every gesture that revealed the judge's true feelings. Judge Hargrove noticed the movement immediately. "Ma'am, observers need to remain seated during proceedings." "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm an authorized court observer documenting procedural compliance." Dr. Bennett kept her voice professional and calm. Judge Hargrove barely looked up from his papers. "I don't care what community organization sent you. Sit down and stay quiet or leave." The first direct confrontation. Dr. Bennett had been dismissed as a community organization volunteer. Exactly the kind of assumption that revealed underlying bias. She remained standing. "Your Honor, there seems to be a misunderstanding about my authorization to—" "There's no misunderstanding." Judge Hargrove's voice rose sharply. "This is my courtroom. I make the rules. Sit down now or be held in contempt." The bailiff shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene. Court proceedings were not supposed to involve judges arguing with gallery observers, but Judge Hargrove seemed determined to assert his authority over everyone in the room. Dr. Bennett calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out her credentials. "Your Honor, if I could just show you my proper identification." "I don't want to see your identification. I want to see you sitting quietly in the back row like every other spectator." Brianna Foster stood frozen at the podium, watching her hearing derail into a power struggle between the judge and a woman she had never seen before. Her children's future hung in the balance while Judge Hargrove chose to focus on controlling a stranger in his courtroom. "Ms. Foster," Judge Hargrove snapped his attention back to the case. "Since you can't provide proper documentation for your claims, I'm denying your request for increased support. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to attend parenting classes to better understand how to manage your household expenses." The ruling hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Brianna's face crumpled. She had brought every piece of evidence she could legally obtain, presented her case clearly and respectfully, and been told she needed parenting classes because she could not afford her children's medical bills. Dr. Bennett had heard enough. She stepped forward again, this time with unmistakable authority. "Your Honor, I must formally object to these proceedings on the grounds of procedural bias." The courtroom went dead silent. Observers do not formally object to anything. That language belonged to attorneys, prosecutors, people with legal standing. Judge Hargrove's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "What did you just say?" "I said I'm formally objecting to these proceedings. The defendant in this case has been subjected to different evidentiary standards than previous defendants, and I'm required to document that discrepancy." Judge Hargrove's face flushed red. "Required by whom? Who exactly do you think you are?" Dr. Bennett approached the bench with measured steps. "Your Honor, I am Dr. Rachel Bennett, and I need to inform you that this courtroom is currently under federal review for— I don't care if you're the Queen of England." Judge Hargrove exploded from his chair. "You will not disrupt my proceedings with your activist nonsense." He stepped down from the bench, an unprecedented break in courtroom protocol, and moved toward Dr. Bennett with obvious aggression. The bailiff started forward, then hesitated, caught between protecting the judge and maintaining order. "Put away that notebook and sit down, or I'll have you arrested for contempt, disorderly conduct, and interfering with judicial proceedings." Dr. Bennett held her ground. "Your Honor, please understand that I have federal authority to observe and document." "You have no authority in my courtroom." Judge Hargrove was now less than 3 feet away, his voice echoing off the walls. "This is my domain, my rules, my decisions." The power dynamic had completely shifted. What started as a child support hearing had become a confrontation between a judge drunk on his own authority and a woman who represented everything he could not control. Dr. Bennett pulled out her phone to document the escalating situation. The movement was professional, measured, and non-threatening. She was simply doing her job. Judge Hargrove saw the phone and lost whatever remained of his composure. "Put that device away. No recordings in my courtroom. Give it to me right now." He reached for her phone while grabbing hands. Dr. Bennett stepped back calmly. "Sir, this is federal property being used for official documentation. I cannot allow you to— Shut your mouth and know your place." The words hung in the air for a split second before Judge Hargrove's hand flew across Dr. Bennett's face with vicious force. The crack of flesh against flesh echoed through the stunned courtroom like a gunshot. 47 witnesses gasped in unison. Brianna Foster covered her mouth in horror. The court reporter's hands froze above her keyboard. The bailiff's radio crackled with static, but he was too shocked to respond. Dr. Bennett did not flinch, did not cry, did not stumble backward. She touched her stinging cheek with one hand and looked directly into Judge Hargrove's eyes with a calm that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "You have no idea what you just did." Judge Hargrove stood frozen, his hand still raised from the slap, staring at Dr. Bennett like he was seeing her for the first time. The courtroom had become a tableau of shock, 47 witnesses holding their collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "I know exactly what I did," Judge Hargrove said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried just seconds before. "I maintained order in my courtroom." Dr. Bennett's calm was unnerving. She did not rub her cheek, did not step backward, did not show any of the fear or submission he had expected from his display of raw power. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket with deliberate precision. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "you just committed assault on a federal officer." The federal badge caught the harsh courtroom lights as she held it up for everyone to see. Gold medal, official seal, government credentials that transformed everything about the last few seconds. Judge Hargrove's confident smirk melted like ice in summer heat. "Federal, what?" Dr. Rachel Bennett, Director of Federal Judicial Misconduct Investigations. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. This courtroom has been under federal surveillance. The bailiff finally found his voice. Your Honor, what's the protocol here? Judge Hargrove ignored him, his eyes locked on the badge that represented the end of everything he had built. Dr. Bennett, there's been a misunderstanding. You were disrupting proceedings and you had to maintain nothing. Her interruption was surgical, precise. You chose to physically assault a federal investigator conducting an official review of complaints alleging systematic racial bias in your courtroom. Brianna Foster still stood at the podium, forgotten in the chaos, watching her child's support hearing transform into something that belonged on the evening news. Other gallery observers pulled out their phones, instinctively understanding they were witnessing history. Dr. Bennett continued with devastating calm. 47 families have filed formal complaints about discriminatory treatment in this courtroom. I have spent months documenting patterns of bias in your rulings, your sentencing, your treatment of defendants based on race. She gestured toward her notepad, still open, still filled with observations that would soon become federal evidence. Today's session was meant to be routine observation. Instead, you have provided definitive proof of everything we suspected. Judge Hargrove's face had gone completely white. He had never considered that his behavior was being monitored, analyzed, documented by people with the power to destroy his career. The federal marshals are already on the way, Dr. Bennett said, checking her phone with professional efficiency. I sent an emergency signal when you made physical contact with a federal officer. Marshals. Judge Hargrove's voice cracked slightly. Dr. Bennett, surely we can discuss this privately. I apologize for my reaction, the stress of managing a busy docket. The time for private discussions ended when you told me to know my place and struck a federal investigator. She returned the badge to her pocket with finality. You are now the subject of a federal criminal investigation for assault on a government official, civil rights violations, and abuse of judicial authority. The courtroom doors burst open as two federal marshals entered, their presence immediately commanding attention. They wore bulletproof vests, carried official documentation, and moved with the purpose of people who had been briefed on exactly what they would find. Dr. Bennett, the lead marshal nodded respectfully. We received your emergency signal. What's the situation? Judge Hargrove looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. Marshals, I'm Judge William Hargrove. There's been a misunderstanding. This woman was disrupting my courtroom. Sir, the marshal interrupted, please step away from Dr. Bennett and return to the bench. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Suddenly, Judge Hargrove was taking orders in his own courtroom from people who answered to a higher authority than his black robes and wooden gavel. Dr. Bennett addressed the marshals with professional brevity. The assault occurred in full view of 47 witnesses. A court reporter documented the entire exchange. Judge Hargrove struck me after I identified myself as a federal investigator. The lead marshal nodded and spoke into his radio. Control, we need an evidence collection team to the county courthouse in Franklin County, courtroom 6. Federal officer assault confirmed. Brianna Foster finally found her voice. Excuse me, what happened to my case? My children need... Dr. Bennett turned to her with genuine compassion. Ms. Foster, your case will be reviewed and reheard by an impartial federal magistrate. Every family affected by biased rulings in this courtroom will receive the same consideration. Judge Hargrove made one last desperate attempt at damage control. Dr. Bennett, I have served this community honorably. Surely my record speaks to my character. Your record is exactly what we will be examining, she replied. Every case, every sentence, every decision will be reviewed for patterns of discrimination. Starting today, this courthouse operates under federal oversight. The marshals approached the bench with handcuffs ready. Judge Hargrove's reign was over. Judge William Hargrove, the lead federal marshal's voice carried across the silent courtroom with official authority. You are under arrest for assault on a federal officer. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed like gunshots in the stunned silence. Judge Hargrove's wrists, which had signed countless sentences and wielded a gavel, were now secured behind his back in his own courtroom. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The Miranda rights Judge Hargrove had heard read thousands of times to defendants were now being recited for his benefit. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Dr. Bennett stepped forward, no longer the quiet observer who had been dismissed and attacked. She was now clearly in charge, her federal authority transforming the entire atmosphere of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the shocked gallery, "I need everyone to remain seated. You are all now federal witnesses to a crime against a government official." Phones appeared throughout the courtroom as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A sitting judge being arrested in his own domain, handcuffed by federal marshals while his victims watched from the gallery. "Dr. Bennett," Judge Hargrove's voice was barely a whisper, "please, can we discuss this reasonably? I have a family, a reputation. You should have considered your family before you decided to assault a federal investigator." Her response was ice-cold and professional. "You should have considered your reputation before you spent years denying equal justice to families based on the color of their skin." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Federal case file on systematic investigation into allegations of racial bias in the courtroom of Judge William Hargrove, Franklin County Circuit Court. The folder landed on the defense table with a heavy thud. 47 formal complaints. Statistical analysis showing black defendants in your courtroom receive sentences averaging 73% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Bail denial rates that differ by race at a ratio of 4.2 to 1. Breonna Foster stared from the podium, still processing that the woman who had just saved her case was one of the most powerful federal investigators in the country. Dr. Bennett continued with devastating precision. "We have documented instances of you referring to black defendants as you people. We have recorded evidence of you questioning black parents' fitness while accepting identical circumstances from white parents without comment." She pulled out a tablet and swiped through screens of data. One case involved Derek Johnson, black father, denied custody modification despite stable employment and housing. The same period, Thomas Mitchell, white father, granted an identical request with less documentation. Judge Hargrove's lawyer would later argue these were isolated incidents, coincidences, misunderstandings, but the numbers did not lie. The patterns were undeniable. Another case involved Angela Williams, black mother, sentenced to 30 days for contempt after questioning a custody decision. The same period, Jennifer Collins, white mother, received a verbal warning for identical behavior. The evidence kept coming. Each case a devastating indictment of systematic bias that had destroyed families and perpetuated inequality under the guise of blind justice. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been monitoring your courtroom through various means," Dr. Bennett explained to the riveted audience. "Audio surveillance, statistical analysis of case outcomes, witness interviews, and direct observation." She gestured toward the court reporter who was documenting every word of this historic moment. "Your court reporter, Karen Ellis, approached our office with concerns about the hostile work environment and biased treatment she was required to document daily." Karen Ellis nodded nervously from her station. She had been afraid to speak up for years, watching injustice play out while being powerless to stop it. The federal investigation had given her voice, meaning, and protection. "Bailiff David Morales contacted our Civil Rights Division after witnessing you make derogatory comments about Hispanic families during closed-door sessions." Bailiff Morales straightened his shoulders, no longer ashamed of reporting behavior that violated everything law enforcement was supposed to represent. Dr. Bennett turned back to Judge Hargrove, who was now slumped in his chair between two federal marshals. "Today was intended to be a routine final observation before we filed our report. Instead, you provided us with irrefutable evidence of everything we suspected." She held up her phone, which had been recording the entire interaction. Physical assault on a federal officer, verbal abuse based on racial assumptions, abuse of judicial authority, obstruction of a federal investigation. The charges would multiply as the investigation deepened, but the core evidence was already overwhelming. "Judge Hargrove," Dr. Bennett's voice carried the weight of institutional justice, "your behavior today was not an aberration. It was the natural culmination of documented bias, discrimination, and abuse of power." She addressed the gallery directly. "Every person in this courtroom who has witnessed discriminatory treatment, who has felt their voice did not matter because of their skin color, who has been denied equal justice, your experiences were valid, your complaints were heard. Your suffering was documented and will be addressed." Breonna Foster began crying, not from sadness, but from relief. Years of being treated like a second-class citizen in the place where justice was supposed to be blind, and finally someone with real power had seen the truth. The Franklin County Circuit Court system would undergo comprehensive federal oversight effective immediately. Dr. Bennett announced all cases decided in this courtroom would be reviewed for evidence of bias. Families who received unjust treatment would have their cases reheard by impartial federal magistrates. She gestured toward the federal marshals. Judge Hargrove will be processed through the same system he has used to deny justice to others. He will receive the same presumption of innocence he has withheld from defendants based on their race. The transformation was complete. The man who had wielded absolute power over families' lives, who had hidden his prejudice behind the dignity of judicial robes, who had told a federal investigator to know her place, he was now just another defendant in the system he had corrupted. Dr. Bennett packed her materials with professional efficiency. The Federal Judicial Review Board would convene an emergency session to address Judge Hargrove's immediate removal from the bench and the appointment of federal oversight for this courthouse. As the marshals prepared to escort Judge Hargrove from his former domain, Dr. Bennett delivered the final blow to his arrogance. "Your Honor," she said with quiet satisfaction, "now you know your place." The courtroom doors closed behind the disgraced judge with a finality that echoed through the halls of justice. For the first time in years, those halls would live up to their promise. Justice, it seemed, was finally blind to everything except the truth. The federal evidence collection team arrived, transforming courtroom 6 into what looked like a crime scene investigation. Photographers documented every angle. Digital forensic specialists began downloading files from the court's computer systems. Audio technicians tested recording equipment that had been secretly monitoring Judge Hargrove's proceedings. Dr. Bennett stood at the center of it all, coordinating the largest federal judicial misconduct investigation in the state's history. "Agent Garcia," she called to the lead evidence specialist, "I need you to secure all case files. Pay special attention to sentencing disparities and custody decisions." Agent Garcia nodded, already pulling boxes of files from the court clerk's office. "Dr. Bennett, preliminary numbers are staggering. We're seeing conviction rate differences of over 60% based on defendant race." The scope of Judge Hargrove's bias was becoming clear with every document examined. This was not just about rude comments or harsh treatment. It was systematic discrimination that had destroyed lives and separated families. Brianna Foster approached Dr. Bennett hesitantly. "Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening. Does this mean my case will be heard fairly?" Dr. Bennett turned to her with genuine warmth. "Ms. Foster, your case will absolutely be reheard by an impartial federal magistrate. But more than that, every family that was denied justice in this courtroom will get another chance." She gestured toward a federal victim advocate who had arrived with the investigation team. "Sarah Carter will be working with all affected families to ensure you have proper legal representation and that your cases are handled with the dignity you deserved the first time." Sarah Carter stepped forward with a stack of business cards and informational packets. "We have already identified 127 families whose cases show clear evidence of biased treatment. Each family will be contacted." The number was staggering. 127 families meant Judge Hargrove had been denying equal justice to minority families on a regular basis. Children had been separated from loving parents. Support payments had been unfairly denied. Custody arrangements had been based on racial assumptions rather than the best interests of children. Dr. Bennett's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from FBI headquarters. The investigation was expanding. Preliminary analysis suggested Judge Hargrove's pattern of discrimination might have influenced other judges in the district. "Bailiff Morales," Dr. Bennett called to the man who had blown the whistle earlier, "I need you to walk us through the closed-door conversations you documented." Bailiff Morales stepped forward nervously. He had spent years taking orders from Judge Hargrove, and speaking against him felt like betraying everything he had known about hierarchy and authority. "Dr. Bennett, it started small, comments about certain families being problematic or difficult to work with, but it escalated over time." He pulled out a notebook he had been secretly maintaining. Judge Hargrove would make predictions about how cases would go based on the defendant's name before he had even seen them. "Foster versus Foster," he would say, another welfare case before reading any details. The documented evidence was damning. Bailiff Morales had recorded direct quotes that showed Judge Hargrove's bias was not unconscious. It was deliberate and calculated. He would joke about cleaning up the neighborhood when sentencing young black men, Morales continued, his voice gaining strength. Said he was teaching them lessons their fathers never did. These were not isolated comments. They happened multiple times per week. Court reporter Karen Ellis approached with her own evidence. Dr. Bennett, I have stenographic records. Judge Hargrove would often make comments off the record that I was instructed not to transcribe. She handed over a flash drive. I kept personal copies of everything. Comments about defendants' clothing, assumptions about their employment status, predictions about their criminal history based entirely on their appearance. Dr. Bennett accepted the drive with satisfaction. Ms. Ellis, your courage in coming forward has potentially saved dozens of families from continued injustice. Ellis wiped away tears she had been holding back. I became a court reporter because I believed in justice. Watching Judge Hargrove mock families while I had to sit silently and pretend it was normal, it was destroying my faith in the entire system. The evidence was overwhelming, but Dr. Bennett knew that federal investigations required more than just documentation of bias. They needed to prove systematic intent and demonstrate the full scope of damage caused. Agent Garcia returned with preliminary statistical analysis. Dr. Bennett, the numbers are worse than we thought. Black defendants received sentences averaging 18.3 months longer than white defendants for identical first-time drug offenses. Hispanic families lost custody at a rate 4.7 times higher than white families with similar circumstances. The raw mathematics of discrimination were undeniable. These were not judgment calls or close decisions. They were systematic violations of equal protection under the law. Child support modifications, Garcia continued reading from his tablet. Black mothers' requests were denied 84% of the time, while white mothers' identical requests were approved 71% of the time. Same income brackets, same documentation, completely opposite outcomes. Dr. Bennett's phone rang with a call from the Department of Justice. She answered on speaker so the investigation team could hear. Dr. Bennett, this is Deputy Attorney General Thompson. We've received preliminary reports from Franklin County. How extensive is the misconduct? Deputy Thompson, we are looking at the largest case of systematic judicial bias in recent history. 127 documented families affected with evidence suggesting the discrimination was deliberate and sustained. What's the timeline for federal intervention? Dr. Bennett looked around the bustling courtroom where federal agents were documenting years of injustice. Emergency federal oversight is already in place. We need immediate appointment of a federal magistrate to begin case reviews. Some families have been separated from their children based on biased decisions. Done. Federal Magistrate Elizabeth Morgan will be on site. She's bringing a team of family court specialists to begin emergency case reviews. The conversation ended and Dr. Bennett addressed the growing crowd of courthouse staff, attorneys, and community members who had gathered to witness the unprecedented federal takeover. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing today is the federal justice system correcting a massive failure at the local level. Judge Hargrove's removal is just the beginning of systematic reforms. She gestured toward the evidence collection still underway. Every case decided in this courtroom will be examined for evidence of bias. Families who were wrongfully separated will be reunited. Support payments that were unfairly denied will be recalculated. Custody decisions based on racial assumptions will be overturned. Pastor Henry Brooks from the local African Methodist Episcopal Church had arrived with several community leaders. Dr. Bennett, our families have been complaining about this courthouse for years. Nobody would listen to us. Pastor Brooks, I understand your frustration. The federal government failed to intervene sooner and families suffered as a result. That changes today. She pulled out a tablet showing the investigation timeline. We received the first formal complaints. Within days, we had launched a full federal investigation. It took time to build an ironclad case, but we could not risk Judge Hargrove escaping accountability on a technicality. Defense attorney Kevin Thompson, who had practiced before Judge Hargrove for years, approached with his own observations. Dr. Bennett, I have watched this bias for a long time. I started keeping my own records after I noticed my black clients were consistently receiving harsher treatment. He handed over his documentation. I have comparative case files showing identical circumstances resulting in wildly different outcomes based solely on the defendant's race. 2 DUI cases. Same blood alcohol level, same prior record. White defendant got probation. Black defendant got 6 months. Attorney Megan Wilson joined the conversation. "I have been practicing family law." Judge Hargrove would ask black mothers about their employment history, education background, and living arrangements. White mothers with identical circumstances got standard questions about the children's needs. The evidence kept mounting. The federal investigation had given everyone permission to speak truth to power, and years of suppressed observations were finally seeing daylight. Dr. Bennett's tablet chimed with an update from the Department of Justice. Federal grand jury has been impaneled to consider criminal charges against Judge Hargrove, civil rights violations, conspiracy to deny equal protection, and abuse of authority under federal statute. The criminal case would proceed separately from the administrative removal of Judge Hargrove from the bench. Even if he somehow avoided prison time, his judicial career was permanently over. Agent Garcia approached with the most damning evidence yet discovered. "Dr. Bennett, we found Judge Hargrove's personal calendar. He was scheduling certain types of cases for specific days." He showed her the tablet screen. Mondays and Fridays, predominantly white defendants. Midweek, predominantly minority defendants. He was literally segregating his docket. The deliberate nature of the discrimination was now undeniable. This was not unconscious bias or bad judgment. It was systematic. Intentional denial of equal justice based on race. Community activist Rosa Gutierrez approached Dr. Bennett with tears in her eyes. "Doctor, my sister lost custody of her children in this courtroom. She has been fighting to get them back ever since. The father has a drug problem, but Judge Hargrove said my sister was unstable because she worked 2 jobs to support her family." "Your sister's case will be among the first reviewed," Dr. Bennett assured her. "Federal Magistrate Morgan specializes in correcting unjust custody decisions. If your sister lost her children due to biased reasoning, that wrong will be made right." Dr. Bennett addressed the investigation team with final instructions. "We have enough evidence to proceed with immediate federal charges. Let's begin notifying affected families that their cases will be reviewed and their voices will finally be heard." The federal takeover of the Franklin County Circuit Court was complete. Justice had been delayed, but it was no longer denied. The Federal Judicial Review Board convened in an emergency session to determine Judge William Hargrove's fate. The hearing took place in the same courthouse where he had dispensed biased justice, but now federal flags flanked the bench where his portrait once hung. Dr. Bennett sat at the prosecution table, surrounded by boxes of evidence that documented the systematic destruction of equal justice. Across the room, Judge Hargrove looked diminished in his civilian clothes, flanked by expensive attorneys who knew they were fighting an unwinnable case. Federal Judge Elizabeth Ford presided over the hearing with the gravitas befitting a proceeding that would reshape judicial accountability nationwide. "Dr. Bennett, please present your findings to the panel." Dr. Bennett rose with quiet authority. "Honorable judges, we documented 127 cases of discriminatory treatment based solely on race. The statistical evidence is overwhelming and undeniable." She activated a large screen showing comparative data. Black defendants in Judge Hargrove's courtroom received sentences 73% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Hispanic families lost custody at rates 470% higher than white families with similar circumstances. The numbers filled the room like accusations. Each percentage point represented families destroyed, children separated, lives derailed by prejudice masquerading as justice. "More damning than the statistics," Dr. Bennett continued, "are the recorded statements from courthouse staff documenting Judge Hargrove's explicit racial bias in closed-door sessions." She played audio recordings that made the federal panel visibly uncomfortable. Judge Hargrove's voice captured by surveillance equipment, making predictions about defendants based on their names, joking about cleaning up neighborhoods, and expressing satisfaction when black families lost custody battles. Judge Hargrove's lead attorney, Robert Sterling, attempted a desperate defense. "Your Honor, my client served honorably. These allegations represent a small fraction of thousands of cases handled fairly and impartially." Dr. Bennett responded with devastating precision. "Counsel suggests that systematic discrimination affecting 127 documented families is somehow acceptable because other cases were handled fairly. That logic would excuse any pattern of civil rights violations as long as some citizens received equal treatment." She turned to address Judge Hargrove directly. "Your Honor was recorded saying, and I quote, 'These people need to learn their place in society.' You said this about black families seeking equal justice in your courtroom. Judge Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His attorneys had advised him to remain silent, but the weight of evidence made any defense seem futile. Federal Judge Ford addressed the defendant. Judge Hargrove, do you have anything to say before this panel renders its decision? Hargrove stood slowly, his voice barely audible. I apologize to any families who felt they were treated unfairly. That was never my intention. Dr. Bennett stood immediately. Your Honor, intention is irrelevant when the impact is systematic denial of constitutional rights. Judge Hargrove's intention does not restore custody to wrongfully separated families or return years of unjust sentences to defendants. The federal panel deliberated. When they returned, Judge Ford's expression left no doubt about their decision. Judge William Hargrove, this panel finds overwhelming evidence of systematic judicial misconduct, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. You are hereby permanently removed from the bench, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted in quiet satisfaction from community members who had traveled to witness justice finally served. Furthermore, Judge Ford continued, your judicial pension is revoked and you are subject to federal criminal prosecution for civil rights violations under Section 1983. Judge Hargrove's shoulders sagged as his judicial authority evaporated in a single sentence. The man who had told Dr. Bennett to know her place now faced criminal charges and financial ruin. Dr. Bennett addressed the panel with her final recommendations. Your Honor, Federal Magistrate Amanda Clark has already begun reviewing affected cases. Families have been reunited with wrongfully separated children. Cases are being reheard with proper legal representation. She gestured toward the gallery where many of those affected families sat watching justice unfold. Brianna Foster received fair child support modification after her case was reheard by Magistrate Clark. Rosa Gutierrez was reunited with her children after a federal review found no legitimate grounds for custody loss. The systematic healing was already underway, but Dr. Bennett knew the real victory lay in prevention. Most importantly, she concluded, this courthouse now operates under permanent federal oversight. Mandatory bias training has been implemented for all judicial staff. Statistical monitoring will prevent future discrimination from taking root. Judge Ford nodded approvingly. Dr. Bennett, your investigation has not only corrected past injustices but created safeguards to prevent future violations. The federal oversight model developed here will be implemented in courthouses nationwide. As the hearing concluded, Judge Hargrove was led away in handcuffs, the same restraints he had ordered for countless defendants who deserved better treatment than their skin color allowed them to receive. Justice finally was truly blind. The changes were immediately visible. The lobby displayed new federal oversight certifications alongside updated mission statements about equal justice. Diverse families moved through security with the confidence of people who trusted the system to treat them fairly. Courtroom 6 looked identical physically, but the atmosphere had been transformed completely. Federal Magistrate Amanda Clark presided with dignity and genuine impartiality, treating every family with the respect they deserved, regardless of their background. Your Honor, a young black mother addressed the bench, I'm requesting a custody modification because my ex-husband has been missing visitation appointments. Ms. Johnson, I've reviewed your documentation. Let's discuss what arrangement would serve your children's best interests. Magistrate Clark's tone carried the same patience and professionalism for everyone who appeared before her bench. Dr. Bennett smiled from the gallery. Court reporter Karen Ellis approached Dr. Bennett during recess. Doctor, I wanted to thank you personally. Coming to work used to feel like participating in injustice. Now I'm proud of the transcripts I create. Bailiff Morales nodded in agreement. The whole staff feels different. We're actually serving justice instead of enabling bias. It's what I thought I was signing up for when I became a bailiff. The statistical improvements were remarkable. Under federal oversight, sentencing disparities had dropped to statistically normal ranges. Custody decisions were based on children's welfare rather than parents' skin color. Child support modifications were granted based on financial evidence rather than racial assumptions. Dr. Bennett's phone buzzed with a text from Brianna Foster. Dr. Bennett, my kids wanted me to send this. The message included a photo of 3 smiling children holding a hand-drawn sign reading, "Thank you for helping our mom." The personal victories mattered more than any statistical analysis. Real families were receiving equal justice. Children were growing up in a community where the courthouse represented fairness rather than fear. Pastor Henry Brooks met Dr. Bennett in the courthouse lobby. Doctor, our congregation has been praying for justice in this building for years. Your investigation answered those prayers. Pastor Brooks, the credit belongs to community members like you who refuse to accept injustice as normal. Your complaints and documentation made federal intervention possible. The Hargrove case had become a national model for judicial accountability. Dr. Bennett now traveled across the country implementing similar oversight programs in courthouses with suspicious statistical patterns. Her phone rang with a call from the Department of Justice. Dr. Bennett, we need your expertise in Portland. Statistical analysis suggests systematic bias in their family court system. The work continued. Every courthouse that operated with bias instead of justice would face federal scrutiny. Every judge who thought their position placed them above accountability would learn otherwise. Dr. Bennett gathered her materials and headed toward the exit, passing the wall where Judge Hargrove's portrait once hung. In its place was a simple plaque. Equal justice under law, not just a promise, but a practice. The federal oversight of the Franklin County Circuit Court had proven that the system could correct itself when good people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Have you witnessed bias in your local courthouse? Share your story in the comments below. Every voice matters when fighting for equal justice. Federal oversight depends on community members speaking up about what they observe. Like this video, if you believe accountability should reach every level of our justice system. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Remember, justice delayed does not have to mean justice denied when citizens demand it. Here is a heartfelt, emotional lesson drawn from the story, rewritten in fluent, expressive American English. In the end, the most powerful lesson from that courtroom wasn't about federal badges or dramatic arrests. It was about the quiet courage it takes to stand up when someone in power tries to put you in your place. Dr. Rachel Bennett didn't raise her voice or lose her temper. She simply refused to shrink. When Judge William Hargrove slapped her across the face and told her to know her place, she touched her cheek, looked him straight in the eyes, and reminded the entire room that no title, no robe, and no amount of authority can ever justify cruelty or prejudice. That single moment of calm dignity exposed the ugly truth hiding behind years of unchecked power. It showed us that real strength isn't loud or aggressive, it's steady, rooted in truth, and unafraid to face injustice with quiet resolve. This story reminds us that prejudice doesn't always wear an obvious face. Sometimes it hides behind polite smiles, official titles, or tough love rulings that quietly destroy lives. But when good people refuse to stay silent, when victims speak up, when whistleblowers find their voice, and when someone like Dr. Bennett walks into the room ready to document the truth, systems built on bias can finally be held accountable. The real victory wasn't just one judge losing his robe. It was families getting a second chance, children reunited with parents, and an entire courthouse learning that justice must be blind to everything except fairness and humanity. Never underestimate the power of one person who chooses decency over fear. Your voice, your observations, your courage to speak up when something feels wrong, they matter more than you know. They can shift the balance from oppression to real justice. If this story touched you, if you've ever witnessed bias in your own life or community and felt powerless, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your experiences, your hopes, or even the small ways you've stood up for what's right. Your story could inspire someone else to find their strength. And if you believe in holding power accountable and creating a more just world, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that remind us why courage still changes everything. Together, we can keep demanding that justice isn't just a promise, it's a practice. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.